Welcome to the channel. Semiotic approach in linguistics to ascertain whether, as a form of communication, film follows certain principle of language structures. It is detailed chapter that compares film with various other storytelling and visual art forms like the novel, theatre, painting, and photography to differentiate film as a medium of moving images. Monaco's work built up the theories of two scholars, Christian Metz and C.S. Price. Metz, the Imaginary Signifier, 1977, and Pierce's Film Language, 1974, were pioneering texts in the film semiotics that have deeply influenced the direction of film theory since 1970s as they initiated the comparison of film with language. C.S. Pierce was a late 19th a century American philosopher who is said to have coined the term semiotics, and it's from his classification of sign as a symbol, iconic and indexical, with the Monaco borrows and elaborates how visual code really meaning in an image-based medium such as cinema. Learning objectives. The prescribed reading, the language of film, sign and syntax, is the third chapter of Monaco's book, How to Read a Film, the world of movie, media and multimedia. The sentences are advised to read this paper before going through the study of material. The language of film, sign and syntax is divided into two parts that raise two fundamental questions, which are: does film as medium constitute a language of its own? Does film have a grammar of its own with a unique feature and ways of organizations? Monaco's answer these two questions with a detailed explanation of how film primarily as an image-based art practice and lists the particular feature that differentiate film from any other medium. Remember that Monaco is interested in how the signification process occurs in cinema, or to put it simply, how meaning is constructed with image and sequence, such as they imply certain messages and suggest possibilities that take the film narrative forward, or convey emotions and subjectivities that audience can identify with. Therefore, as you proceed through the chapter, you will learn about the language of cinema and how it works differently from other forms such as theater, photography, and literature. The basic features that constitute the language of cinema, such as short frame movements, mise en scene, and montage. The following section provides a detailed and critical analysis of the different sections of the prescribed chapter. Science, the psychology of perception. James Monaco began his illustration of the specific feature of film as a visual medium with a comparison between language and cinema. Any language system, be it a verbal language like English or French, or a scientific one like mathematics, requires learning familiarity with the units that constitute such languages, like alphabet or number, and most importantly, the knowledge of how to use them correctly to make any sense of it. However, with films, there is no such compulsion. As Monaco points out, even toddlers who have not yet adapted to any spoken language are attracted to moving image and response to them. This proves that cinema has a grammar of its own. It's an audio-visual medium that relies image, the sequence that anyone can interpret in their own way, even without any prior specific knowledge about them. According to Monaco, this is precisely where the challenge of study film lies, as almost everyone can understand it as a basic cognitive level. It is often said, read simplistically at the visual level, or taken too highly as an art form. Instead, Monaco suggests that film, quite like language, offers multiple levels of significations. Film is like a quasi-language, which means that even though learning is not needed, with time and repetition, people can acquire more nuanced skill and sophisticated understanding of how cinema works. Thus, these who watch and observe film more often are able to identify and grasp its particular features and conventions, often acquiring observational skill, in a way educating themselves about how cinema create visual code, gestures and tropes to communicate with the audience. Monaco suggests that while an educated approach is not necessarily to watch and understand a film, the metaphor of language is a useful one to describe film as a phenomenon. Even though everyone can see picture or moving image, not even everyone interpret them in the same fashion. There are always differences in perception and culture interpretation. Film resembles language because only someone who is familiar with the language can hear the sound of a word and associate it with what the word stands for. Alternatively, even in the shared language, words may generate different associations in the mind of people, depending upon factors such as level of literacy, culture, and social status, even imagination and creativity. This is a quality that film shares with language, even though it's primarily an optical medium. Monaco uses a few examples of optical illusions to expand on the optics and psychological functions that make it possible to read and interpret any kind of visual. Therefore, whether it is a pattern of line or a dot or a photograph, these patterns are registered and interpreted by the human brain. However, what we perceive in optical illusion, that is the shape and pattern that we see and interpret in any kind of image, depends on our mental and cultural experience. Another example that Monaco gives to explain the psychology of perception is through comparison of how we listen and how we see. While the car can hear everything in its immediate surroundings, in gradations of volume, the eye functions or by focusing on what it chooses to see, it is field of vision. Other than this psychological function of seeing, Monaco suggests the ethnographical and psychological as two other methods through which various individuals might interpret images that they see. An ethnographical approach is often used by relatively more literature and sophisticated viewers who interpret images based on their knowledge and experience of different kind of cultural conventions. The psychological approach is used by the viewers who are able to incorporate various sets of meaning observed through different perceptions and assimilate them into their experience. Therefore, Monaco opines that while just about anyone can see a film, there are selected and sophisticated viewers who move ahead to read and comprehend film ethnographically and psychologically. In order to enjoy literature in any language, one would need to know how to read it in that language, but cinema makes no such demands and can be seen by everyone. However, it is visual information is organized like any other language system that lends itself to interpretation. Once its codes are identified, audiences are able read cinema as they become familiar with these codes and signs. Film as language. The science is cinema is a short circuit sign. James Monaco draws from film semioticien Christian Metz observation that it is not because the cinema is language that it can tell such fine stories, but rather it has become language because it has told such fine stories. In semiotics, every language and its spoken and written form are all individual systems constituted with their own structure and signs through which communication takes place. A sign is made up of signifier and signified. For example, take any word like cat, that the letter CAT or the sound of it is a signifier and what it represents is a signified. And that is the idea or shape or a form of a small furry animal. In literature, this relationship between the signifier and signified creates such of the pleasure of reading. As Monaco elaborates as a poet composes poetry, the words of some sound or the word signifiers create an idea of meaning of the word signified, such that we read the words, we understand and imagine what it represents. Therefore, if a poet tells us about a rose, the flower that every reader imagine is like to be different, such as seeing the word ROSE. One person might think of the red rose in his garden, another might think of the rose in a vase in the corner of her house, yet another might think of a picture of a rose, and so on. Monaco says that writers engage their readers with this dance between signifier and signified sign, since the sound of the word unleash multiple possibilities of signification, which readers can then imagine and interpret, while writers can utilize the same to refine their craft. For Monaco, this relationship between signifier and signified is the main locus of art, and the power of language system is that there is a great difference between signifier and signified. However, film doesn't enjoy such a privilege. In films, the signifier and signified are almost identical, which means that if a book is shown in a film, you do not only know what is being shown, but exactly what book is being shown. Its title, cover, color are all details that are likely to be visible. That makes the sign is a cinema short circuit sign. In contrast, the letter BOOK do not resemble the object that is a book in any way, but reading it or hearing the word, we know that it refers to. This is a cinema is constituted of images, and images have a more direct relationship with what they signify compared to written or spoken words. Another aspect specific to film is that we have no control over the images as viewers. We cannot modify or change what is already on scene and what we are seeing. Yet, as viewers, we need to interpret what we see like a language. Even even the images that are put in the sequence signify more than just the object or people or places shown. Therefore, the most we learn to read images and observe films, the more we can intellectually unpack them, understand meanings beyond the obvious, and read into their cultural signification. How does semiotics work for films? James Monaco cautions against the crude applications of linguistic theories to sign and structure of films. Film bears some crucial differences from other language systems. For instance, while a word can be taken as a fundamental smallest unit that constitutes spoken written language, part of a film can't be so easily broken down into such small quantifiable units. Every theory of film attempts to equate the shot with a word, a scene with a sentence, and a sequence with paragraph. But this was a flawed project. Unlike any written word, a shot is both an image as well as a unit of time. For example, think of a word painting. The alphabet combined given a single unit of meaning that signifies a frame drawing or a art network. Just seeing this word or hearing it, we understand that it is what it is, but we still do not know which painting, by whom, or where it is placed. The complete sentence in which it appeared will provide that information. The figure 1, for example, it's a dream, 1990, Dr. Akira Kurosawa. This shot established that the man is looking at the portrait painting of Vincent van Gogh. The focus is on the painting, so our eyes are drawn towards that. We are looking at what the character, same thing, and that character is looking at, but our perspective as a spectator is that of the looking over his shoulder. However, in a film, a shot of a painting could be of someone like looking at painting, framed in such a way that we see a person enter the frame and stares at the painting in front of him. We only see his back. In the same shot, with the viewer watching his back, he may move closer to the painting or keep standing still. We know he's looking at the painting and we are looking along with him. Therefore, a shot is about the frame within which an image is captured, as in what is inside the square outline, the cinema and scene. But most significantly, it is also about capturing time. In this case, the time taken to establish that the person is looking at a specific painting. This same activity of looking at painting, when filmed differently, generates an entirely different feeling and context. Below, we have a shot in which we see a woman sitting in front of a painting, which then cuts to detail of her surroundings, and with each detail, a close shot of select portions of the painting follows. The camera focuses on part of the painting, leaving the woman out of its frame. With each cut, it frames another detail in her surroundings as well as paintings, perhaps a clue towards the next scene. With a change in the frame, short sequence and camera movement, the meaning of this setting change from merely a woman observing a painting to us piercing to gather detail of why she is there. Thus, these features of film like a shot, frame or sequence are medium specific, incorporating time and movement. Each shot contains many visual signs and construction in time and space. Now, the other figure which we see, that is director Alfred Hitchcock. A woman sits in front of large portrait with a bouquet next to her. Figure 3, close up of the bouquet. The mid-shot of a bouquet in the painting follows by a close-up. The next shot cuts to another mid-shot, this time focus on how her hair is rolled and pinned up. Cut to the shot of a painting again. The time we see a mid-close of the painting faced the slender shoulder, and notice that the hair is tied in the frame's rolled up fashion. Entire sequence is established through visual code of seeing. Each shot offers a new information, and shift in a perspective on the painting reveal a new clue. In the full sequence, we see that women sitting On the bench is being watched by someone, just like she's reading the painting. Someone is reading all the details in her surroundings to know who she is. She, the full sequence here. Film is not constituted of such singular and neat units of meaning. Similarly, to compare a scene to a sentence or a sequence to paragraph also doesn't quite work because unlike written spoken languages, there is no fixed grammar of constructing scene or sentences. Scenes and sequences are developed according to the choice that the filmmakers make. The practice that are common in industry, skills of performers and film yarners, among several other stylistic and cultural choices. For example, a dramatic scene between a couple can be framed in a long shot where couple is present inside a spacious dining room. We see them alone, the horizontal axis, like a theater stage, and camera gradually moves towards the close-seated couple. The shot change in shot. The couple is slightly older and look richer. Soon in the short reverse shot exchange, this conversation turns from disappointment to quarrel and finally stop as a mid-shot of the man's face. We see them, now an aged couple, harboring only resentment towards each other. Director Orson Welles. The opening of the scene is a mid-shot of newly married couple sitting in the dining table, fondly gazing at each other. By the end of this sequel, the camera rolls back to frame the distance between the couple, disinterested and resentful towards each other. It is a sharp contrast to how the marriage had begun. The long shot establishes this distance while the dark shadow in the frame indicate an unhappy marriage. The scene encompasses the passage of time and ends with dramatic pause as something emotionally shattering is said in this heated conversation. Both the remains present with the frame and camera pulls back, ending in a long shot that establishes the distance between them. In film, interpersonal dramatic context is often built up by the short reverse shot convention, where the shot alternate between the actor as they speak, emote, and read to the narrative context. As more close-up and mid-shot are chosen to capture any one-on-one conversation, the rapid intercutting accelerate the rhythm of sequence, enhancing the confrontational nature of such dramatic episode. Such scene can be sequence or even part of continuing narrative sequence within a film. Here it is a tightly bounded sequence that shows time lapse. Sequences with the combination of several shots and scenes build the continuity and pace of the film. For example, think of chase sequence in action movie with usually involved alternating parallel action, one which follows the chase and another which follows the one who is being chased. It is usually end up both the parallel actions converging at one point in which either the chase will escape or chase will win. Therefore, while film can be compared to written language, it functions very differently. Rather than providing us with the smallest unit of composition, film offers a continuum of meaning. So how does this film language functions that we were trying to understand? Film does not have any specific role or rules for grammar but has developed certain dramatic conventions. Okay, and we will try to identify. The distinguish between the frame, shot and sequence. How are these features related to space, time and movement in the film? Denotative and connotative meaning. In the earlier sections, Monaco identifies certain features of film like frame, shot and sequence, moments in time that are very specific to the medium. Therefore, establishing the difference from one another language system. In this section, the focus on illustrating how film functions as a language. Film, like any other written spoken language, communicates meaning through its denotative and connotative potential. As an image-based medium, film is strongly denotative. As an audiovisual film form, it also creates the closest approximation of reality. While in written language, the alphabet choose to represent an object, person, or place don't have any similarity to what is represented. In cinema, the denotative aspect is stronger because of how closely the image represents what is seen on screen. Language primarily produces meaning through connotative association, expanding beyond an denotative aspect of signs or words. Denotative and connotative meaning. In the earlier section, Monaco identified certain features of film like frame, shot, and sequence, movements, and time that are very specific to the medium. Therefore, establishing the difference from other language system in this section, he focuses on illustrating how film functions as a language. Film, like any other written spoken language, communicates meaning through its denotative and connotative potential. As an image-based medium, film is strongly denotative. As an audiovisual form, it also creates the closest approximation of reality. While in written language, the alphabet chosen to represent an object, person, or place don't have any similarity to what is represented. In cinema, the denotative aspect is strongly because how closely the image represents what is seen on screen. The language primarily produces meaning through connotative association, expanding beyond the denotative aspect of sign or word. Cinema remarkably combines both. Is intrinsically denotative abilities and connotative potentials. All other art forms that create connotative associations can be replicated in film. Besides drawing from other art, film can generate its own connotative meaning because film is ultimately a cultural product. Thus, anything that is represented with a film's narrative has meaning, not only within the context but also acquires meaning according to how it resonates outside the narrative. Cinema remarkably combines both its intrinsically denotative ability and connotative potential. All other art forms that create connotative associations can be replicated in film. Besides drawing from other arts, film can generate its own connotative meaning because film is ultimately a cultural product. Thus, anything that is represented within a film's narrative has meaning, not only within that context but also acquires meaning according to how it resonates outside the narrative. How is cinema connotation created? What are the tools in cinema's disposal to create such meaning? Film's unique connotative ability depends primarily on the shots that are chosen by the filmmakers. Monaco uses the example of filming a rose to explain how cinematic connotations work. Think about it. How you feel about a rose on screen will first depend on what kind of rose is shown. It is fresh or dried up. Does it have thorns? Thorns. Is it a bright color? The second aspect that influences the meaning of the rose will be how it is framed. It is also from a lower angle, such as flower blooms and look ominous, or it is shown from the above where its colors and petals are distinctly visible. The lighting of the shot, whether the rose is bright or dimly lit setting, will also add to the quality and tone of the shot. These tools specifically to film aid in cinema connotations and contribute to the precision or efficiency of the form. Monaco suggests that there are two kinds of cinematic connotations. First is pragmatic connotation, when the scene of the connotation depends on shot which has been selected from range of other possible shots for the same thing. Second is cinematic connotation, when the scene of the shot is determined by which shot has preceded and which shot follows. We look back at the above example of filming a rose to elaborate on this. Paradigmatic connotation depends on which shot is chosen by the filmmakers to frame and represent any object or place or person. Therefore, if rose is filmed from a low-angle shot, it acquires the meaning of being dominant and overpowering. Syntagmatic connotations are determined not by what is within a particular shot but from the shots that precede and follow. Paradigmatic and syntagmatic connotations in cinema offers two axes of meaning and are extremely useful to understand the language of film. Once a filmmaker has decided what to show, two main questions remain. First, how to shot it, which is a paradigmatic aspect, that is, which shot frame and composition within the act. The second is how to present the shot, in what order its sequence and from how long, which involves process of cutting, editing and montage, which constitute the syntagmatic aspect. It is important to note that connotative and denotative meanings are not mutually exclusive categories but can exist simultaneously. In order to distinguish between connotative and denotative meanings construction in cinema, we return to the question of sign in cinema. Monaco borrows the trichotomy of icon, index and symbol. Remember this. Trichotomy. This trichotomy, tri means three. Trichotomy is icon, index and symbol. offered by philosopher C.S. Peirce. The film scholar Peter Wallen to analyze film for the different order of meaning it generates. Cinematic signs are primarily denotative and can be categorized into three order. The icon, in which a similarity between the signifier and signified is because of the close likeness. For example, portraits are icon because of their resemblance to what is represented. Index. The index presents a quality. It has an inherent relationship to what is being represented and it is not identical to it. It can further be divided into technical and metaphorical index. For example, shots of ticking clock can be classified as technical index of time. It is a metaphorical index. One small detail might suggest the overall quality. For example, the shot of someone walking with a rolling gait or a glimpse could indicate the kind of person being represented. The symbol is easier to recognize because it is usually already existed in a cultural convention of representation. According to Monaco, the icon remains the short circuit sign that is characteristics of cinema, as it refers to the identical. A symbol as a sign is more arbitrarily because it is drawn from other existing conventions and usually cinema just borrowed them from art of literature. Finally, it is the index that Monaco considered most characteristics of cinema. An index is neither identical nor arbitrary in signification but functions somewhat midway between the cinema icon and literary index. The index signifies the idea of something. Of example, if one need to express the idea of heat, it could be indicated through an extreme close-up of a simmering beds of the sweat on a forehead or by the rising temperature level on a thermometer. The indexical signs lends metaphorical power to film. Films is a language of continuum. Film is a language of continuum. It is constructed not only through the composition of the frame but also through the sequence of shots. This ability of cinema again grant it's a certain degree of flexibility in terms of what we can put into the frame. Therefore, the indexical sign contains immense potential to both denote as well as create connotative associations with the composition of the frame and order of shot. It is like how metonymy and a synecdoche functions as a figure of speech in language. Metonymy is when an idea or concept is represented by the frame of something it is that is associated with. In cinema, the falling pages of a calendar could indicate the passage of time, such as indexical signs for time as a cinematic short length. It shows you in a compact and skint way that time has passed within the narrative. Similarly, indexes also functions like synecdoche, wherein as a part of an object present a larger idea. For example, if there is a close-up of marching boots in a file, such as image suggests marching man, which further indicates the presence of an army. Therefore, indexical images are much about what is shown or omitted so as to signify a particular idea or notion. At the end of this section, Monaco remarks that since cinema works within limits of space and time, which means that it is about what we see within the frame of a shot and within the duration of the film, cinema needs to work with extension and indexes. Meaning in cinema is generated not only from what we see and what we don't see, but also through association. This last aspect that also functions like a sign in cinema is the elements of trope. While all the examples of cinema construction and signification will now have been more or less about static image, single shot, focusing on particular object and ideas placed within this shot. The trope is a more dynamic element, the connecting elements between denotation and connotation. Film making it possible through the technical capacity to expand meaning through tropes of comparison. So connotative and denotative meanings of cinema, what are they? We are trying to explain. And what is the difference between paradigmatic and a syntagmatic connotation? I repeat again, paradigmatic and syntagmatic connotation. We are trying to understand how are they related to process of shot composition and selection. Denotative and connotative can be classified as icon, index and a symbol. I repeat again, denotative connotations can be classified as icon, index and symbol. Explain these three categories. So syntax. The syntax of a film is result of its uses, not a determinant of it. After describing how image, much like word, function like language system with a different level of signification, in the following section, James Monarchet delves into the process of construction of meaning in film. He elaborates upon cinematic method and choice of images construction. In language system, there are rules of grammar that are essential in order to communicate properly. Words are organized in a sentence according to correct syntax and grammar. However, as discussed earlier, there are no such fixed rules for the organizing images and sequence in cinema. Yet cinema across culture at a different point in history has developed new means of presenting as well as organizing images and sequence, leading to new form and genre of cinema. Monaco observed that the syntax of film or a systematic arrangements of images, sound, movement, and space is descriptive in nature rather than perceptive. What develops of a film syntax is an outcome of uses or culture practice. Syntax in film relates to the fundamental choice that are made regarding filmmaking, such as what to shoot, how to shoot, how much to shoot. These questions are, in turns, depends on industrial convention, cultural factors, aesthetic choices, and narrative needs. But the most important aspect affecting the construction of a film sequence is that, unlike verbal or written narrative, cinema incorporates spatial temporal components. Film is a moving image art form. It is also narrative art form. Thus, film is not restricted to the depiction of object, people or places, but can both record as well as construct space and time within its frame form. Any progression of the plot, action, or story in a film consists of visual construction of space and time within that narrative. The construction of the space within a film is termed mid and set, which is in term derived French theatre and means putting in a scene. In the case of theatre, this refers to placing prop, setting up stage and positioning the actor, whereas in film, while there is a set or a locations where a scene is set up, the selection of shot to frame such modifies exactly how much of that space you will see and what to order. Thus, what you see within the frame or scene, which part of the set, which prop, and what angle constituted the mise en scene of the film. According to Monaco, setting up of a scene is much as organization of film as of space. If mise en scene refer to the organization of space, montage is the modification of the time. Montage is the act of cutting or editing the film. Montage is the editing technique that also composes experience of time in film, consequently controlling the pace and rhythm of the film. Therefore, how long a particular shot or a sequence should be, or when should a shortcut be, another questions related to montage. Mise en scene and montage are principles of organization of time and space. However, film theorists have debated about the proper function of these two aspects of cinema. Mise en scene has been often seen as a leading towards realism, while montage has been seen as an expressionistic. Since the function of the mise en scene element is to construct or frame space in a way that reflects some likeness to the actual world, it is often seen as an essential practice of cinematic realism. In other words, mise en scene in cinema follows the principle of verisimilitude. In contrast, montage multiplies time and space such as it can construct and expand the experience of narrative time. If a rapidly cut sequence can create a sense of urgency, then careful crossing cutting in a dramatic dialogue sequence between two characters can enhance conflict and build up emotional impact of the scene. Therefore, because of the relationship between shot developed through cross-cutting, montage generates meaning by contrast and is often seen as an expressionistic technique. Monaco observed while there have been debate in the film theory regarding which practice is a truer or more ethical method of representation in film. This binary between montage and mise en scene create a separation between time and space which is quite unuseful. While mise en scene established narrative space, setting and context, montage create the experience of time within the narrative. Both are essential in organizing space and time in films. Codes. The structure of cinema depends on the codes that operate within it as well as the codes that is follows. There are not fixed system of meaning but a system of logical relationship within text. Formed by practice and convention, codes can be both cultural as well as artistic. Sometimes that cinema might share with other forms, but there are some codes that are unique to cinema. For instance, gestures or facial expressions can convey similar meaning in theater as well as films. They hold communicative and expressive value in both forms. However, if the shot of a gesture is rapidly intercut with a shot of screaming face, then such a montage structure the action or suspense within the films. This way, it builds upon methods of narration or creates codes that audience learn to identify, interpret, and even anticipate. Codes are critical construction that structure film as well as build an interpretive relationship between audience and the cinematic text. Mise en scene and montage in cinema functions as codes. For example, think of specific film gestures, genres such as action, horror, or romantic comedy. In each of these gestures, you can identify visual codes like color, texture, lighting. In short, the mise en scene elements that signal to you what to expect in each genre. The horror film is likely to have a darker color scheme than the romantic comedy. Similarly, action films tend to draw from spatial and temporal cinematic codes dependence on montage. Action films have established conventions of wide shots of landscape, automobiles, technology, and speed, which are codes that make audience anticipate high-speed chase as well as intense fight sequence. Therefore, codes establish the structure and communicate the logical relationship within various cinematic elements. Mise en scene. What a shot, how to present the shot. In the next three sections, Monaco delineates the actual element of feature that constitute the cinematic mise en scene. According to Monaco, mise en scene in cinema is the tool that filmmakers use to establish, change, subvert, and challenge codes that we learn to interpret while watching films. The elements of mise en scene are also the crucial tool at any filmmaker's disposal to find answers to the three most important questions they are faced with while making a film. What to shot, how to shoot, what to shoot, how to present a shot. The answers for these questions are not arbitrary individual choices but a host of detailed methods of shot composition and shot selection. All the codes of film operate within the frame. Here we look at how the mise en scene construct those codes of meaning. There are three elements of the cinematic mise en scene that Monaco discusses. The framed image. If mise en scene means putting into scene, then in cinema a scene is constructed as a series of shots, and shots are constituted by the composition within the frame. The limit and possibility of representation in cinema play out within the boundaries of this frame, while image composition within the frame has been a preoccupation even in the classical visual art. In cinema, there is also the matter of time and movement that usually shift from one frame to another. Nevertheless, all framed images and compositions are underlined by a set of common concern and enlisted by Rudolf Arnheim, such as balance, shape, form, growth, space, light, color, movement, tension, and expression. Now let's look at how these factors of composition appear in cinema. Aspect ratio. The aspect ratio is the ratio between the width and height of the scene from which a film projected, while the rectangular shape of the frame or the scene at set limit representation. The aperture of the film camera and dimensions of the screen offer different possibilities of composition. An extreme long shot that establishes the landscape and character within. This is known as Western genre film, while typically utilize the widescreen aspect ratio in its shot composition. Even when the perspective shifts, the shot is reversed and we see the other end of the previous shot, the spatial terrain indistinctly visible in the widescreen aspect ratio. These men are framed by the witnessed vastness of the desert landscape. Monaco explains that when the standard aspect ratio in 1940 was 1.33, films contained more interior faces and dialogues. As the dimension become wider and aspect ratio increases to 2.33 and above, this change usurer in the widescreen such as CinemaScope and pan vision eventually result in the visual composition shift to the exterior and landscape, open and closed form. These forms depends on what kind of movement is organized by or to allowed within the frame. If the scene is such that the frame is filled with a dramatic close-up of the face, that would be a closed form, since the drama of the scene is communicated through the facial expression and no other visual information is in the picture. An open form in which the frame of the shot is such as we expect an action to occur. Plans of composition. This refers to the axis along with the composition within a frame to organize. There are three plans: frame, geographical, and depth. To put it simply, this is about what it put in foreground, that the background, what kind of depth of the space is constructed. For example, if in a shot of an interior, the character and proper are positions entirely along the horizontal axis, then one doesn't get much sense or how long a small room. However, if the actor are positioned in a regular fashion, such as one is in the foreground, another is in the background, the depth of the space is established. Color. Color is an extremely significant element of composition that create balance or contrast within a frame. It can distinguish the spatial plan between the element and background and foreground. It can codify meaning in the subject or an object. It can also function as a trope that reoccur through the film's narratives. Color is both a constituent of chemical process or technical features of the film as well as a culturally defined code. Lights. Like quiet color lines within frame composition, light also establishes depth and meaning. While in classical visual art, light was represented through the logical relationship of the subject to the light source. In cinema, it enhances the visual and cultural code. Light also has a specific relationship to photochemical process of film. The diachronic shot. In the previous section, Monaco talked about the major film codes operating within a static film frame. Here he identifies and discusses in detail the variables of the dynamic or diachronic shot: distance, focus, angle, movement, and point of view. Monaco underlines not only the kind of shot but also compositional and conceptual feature of the shot. It makes in one of the fundamental features of the cinema mise and scene, and shots are usually described according to previous distance between the camera and subject, such a full shot, mid shot, long shot, extreme long shot, and close-up. Camera angles are integral in establishing depth, space, and perception in a shot. They are define the relationship between the subject and filmmaker, depending on whether the camera is overhead, at eye level, low level. Along with the syntax and arrangement of the distance inside the frame, the other compositional feature of the shot is focus, namely deep focus, shallow focus, soft focus. Focus is in a shot is variable. It can change from one shot to another. It can also change within the same shot, but most importantly, it is essential to maintain and continuum between shots. Soft focus is usually used to qualify the role and emotion of the favorable character and set up emotional tone or mood of sequence. Deep focus is the technique when within a shot, the entire space is kept in focus, such as the background is seen with much clarity as the foreground. Movement is another important variable in the diachronic shot. Is the importance of the remember that in film, each shot anticipates the next one. A shot is not only based on the coordinates of the distance, movement is also integral to the film camera. Therefore, the camera can frame while moving from one point to another, as in tracking shots. Further, it can also convey an impression of the movement without actually moving, as in zoom. In a tracking shot, the camera moves along one axis and so that depth of the perception shift as the distance between the subject and the screen shift. In a zoom shoot, spatial relationship between object don't change, but the image become larger and we see the subject up close. For a detailed discussion on the shot composition, see e-resources. Monaco also touches upon the point of the view in the camera, which is considered the fifth variable in a diachronic shot. He points out how Hollywood has an established idiom in the aspect similar to prose narrative. Camera movements such as close shot in the beginning quickly establish an omniscient point of view in the narrative. Sound. Borrowing from Christian Metz, different channel of the information that cinema provides, Monaco identifies speech, music, and noise sound effects as three entities of the sound in films. Sound has a unique features because it is not only omnipresent but also omnidirectional. What Monaco suggests is that sound is so pervasive that it often goes unnoticed. In film, the soundtrack is where the sound is controlled and constructed. Speech or dialogues easily draw attention to the action, but also affect need to be inserted at a required place. The soundtrack also generates codes between sound and image. Siegfried Karkauser has divided film sound into actual sound, which connect to the image, and communicative sound, which is external. Another division from Karel Reyes is more commonly used in the film theory, which is synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous sound is that which comes from a source in scene, such as dialogue between character and sound of the footsteps. And asynchronic sound is not from the source but a scene but and added to the soundtrack, like musical scores and sound effect. It is outside the frame and narrative but also add to the mood, emotion, and even direction of the film. Sometimes asynchronic sound is also used at contrapunctual sound, which offers a counterpoint to the image and action on screen. Montage. In Europe, the act of cutting or editing a film was termed montage. In 1920, the practice of editing that was developed by early European filmmakers with style like German Expressionism and Soviet montage developed this idea of editing as synthesis, putting things together. Film was understood as a constructed form based on the concept of putting shot together one after another. Monaco explains that technically shot can be put together only in two ways, by overlapping as in superimposition or dissolve, or by placing them end to end. Montague, as both practiced the theory of editing, developed and expanded on the possibility of putting shots together. First, montage was viewed as a dialectical process wherein, after the juxtaposition of two adjacent shots, a third meaning emerged that one might not be there in the two individual shots. Second, montage was understood as a process that wove together multiple shots within a rapid span of time, thus not only packing in a lot of information within a short duration sequence but also adding sensation and rhyme to the filmic context. Montage was the opposite of editing practice followed in Hollywood, which emphasized invisible cutting. To keep audience from noticing the cut, maintaining a strict logic of setting, space and time with a narrative, Hollywood grammar insisted on the seamless change from one shot to another so that the focus of the audience remained on narrative action. In contrast, the montage convention were based on rapid cutting even between still and short duration shots and repetition to establish the nature of action that was taking place. Montage followed continuity between shot and when, including an accelerated piece of the sequence. Parallel montage was used by filmmaking to alternate between two stories and two spaces of action, cross-cutting between to enhance dramatic conflict. However, montage gained attention primarily for its juxtaposition. Montage was the opposition of the editing practice followed in Hollywood, which emphasized invisible cutting to keep audience from noticing the cut. Maintaining the strict logic of setting space and time within the narrative, Hollywood grammar insisted on seamless change from one shot to another, so that the focus of the audience remains on the narrative action. In contrast, the montage conventions were based on rapid cutting even between still shots and shots duration shots, and repetition to establish a nature of action that was taking place. Montage followed continuity between shots only when building an accelerated pace for a sequence. Parallel montage was used to filmmaking to alternate between two stories of two spaces of action, cross-cutting between to enhance dramatic conflict. However, montage gained attention primarily for its juxtaposition of shots from different space, time, and context. Montage did not place shot in chronological order. Instead, it created another meaning altogether through repetition and juxtaposition. Montage techniques either compressed or expand the experience of time in films. If the continuity style wanted to make the editing process invisible to audience, Montage wanted to demonstrate it. Montage was geared towards unsettling the audience or producing a shock effect rather than seamless submission to the narrative. For a detailed institution of, for the detailed illustration of these techniques, see e-resource. Monaco concludes his detailed observation on the syntax of Miss Scene and Montague with a quick comment on punctuation in cinema, but how the ending of the shots or sequence are typically marked. In early and silent cinema, there are insertions of intertitles to provide brief information. When moving from one scene to another, or even the end title card, which worked as a full stop. Moreover, there were also cinematic practices like fade, dissolve, irish, and wipe effect, and were stylized ways of transition from one sequence to another. Such stylistic choices marked and announced the transition of the end of the one spatial sequence and beginning to another. Today, the dominant convention is just cut to the next scene, and the case of the ending, fade out of the freeze or frame. Conclusion. James Monaco's essay on overview of the codes and practices of making meaning in cinema. It observes cinema as developing its own language system and unique sign, symbol, icon, and audience, where whether consciously or unconsciously always read to make sense of a film. By typically audiences tend to pursue the story of a film. This essay explains how the narrative is constructed through visual and cinematic elements such as framing, shot composition, movement, editing, and soundtrack. These aspects constitute the language and syntax of the cinema, which are deployed by filmmakers to craft their character and narrate their films. Monaco provides an illustrative survey of the fundamental cinematic tool and process as they develop in Western film culture. The sections on Miss Scene and Montague identify elements that are specific to cinema as a medium and form. Finally, depending upon the cultural practices of the filmmaking and shift in film technology, conventions and stylistic practices change, and the language of cinema also transform. So the thing which we need to check is Mrs. Scene. What is Mrs. Scene in cinema? Explain how cinematic Mrs. Scene. Elements such as framing, light, and color acts as a code of meaning. What is a diachronic shot? Mention some variables of the diachronic shot.